Are we all? Okay. It's good to, fantastic to be here in Xi'an, China. I'd like to thank the organisers of the conference, the Asia Pacific Finance and Development Institute and the Asian Development Bank for hosting this wonderful event. My name is David Slattery. I'm currently Regional Innovation Advisor for the Independent Evaluation Office of the UNDP, covering the Asia Pacific region. Microphone coming through clearly. I don't want to go without. Is it better if I go without? Kind of cutting in and out quite a bit. Okay, so I covered this topic on evaluation capacity development in the Australian Public Service, including the Australian Auditor General's Department, the Australian Foreign Affairs Department, as well as several roles with the United Nations Development Programme, both in New York and we've got a lot of experts here from different countries. This is not going to be scientific. I'm interested in the poll about how you're feeling about your country's evaluation system. So, overall, thinking about your country, do you feel like they've basically got a decent system? It doesn't need to be perfect. There can be gaps or flaws, but basically you're going to give it a pass. So raise your hand. Do you think you give it a pass or a fail? So raise your hand if you think it's a pass, if you think basically your country's system is working okay. Interesting, not many hands. So we're evaluators. So I'm expecting this in some ways. We're a critical bunch, in part, our kind of professional calling card is scepticism. So when we're asked whether a glass is half empty or half full, we usually do tend to come on the half full side of the equation. What we're going to do today is explore whether we have a clear understanding as a community about what national evaluation systems are and what the hallmarks are of good or bad ones. This is as a way of asking how we can best engage as a community of experts in the objective of strengthening those systems. I'm keen to discuss this with you because, like many of you, my role is focused on strengthening evaluation systems in the region. And while I absolutely agree this is a critical agenda for us to think about as a community, it's also one that I find extremely challenging. It's challenging because the scope of what could be considered important is enormous. We have, at the apex of all of our systems, there are political institutions. Inevitably, politics is the answer to the question of what is the value that we should be trying to produce through our governments. And it plays a huge role in framing the questions that we can ask as evaluators. There's a bureaucratic element. What is it that our public institutions, and we can do, most of us are bureaucrats, can do in trying to shape our political decisions in a way that better matches the evidence about what will work best for our societies. Then there's what happens outside of government with our non-government institutions, the public, the private sector, and the role that this plays in shaping or influencing decisions that do or don't deliver public value through our political processes. There's formal structures for evaluation. But there's also a huge amount of evaluation that's hidden in the halls of our parliaments and within our bureaucracies. And to add to this, we have a huge diversity of contexts. We all know that what will work in one situation is not going to work in another. So how can we be confident about what will work best for different contexts and countries that we work with? This is really hard at an institutional level. I think it's super hard, even more hard at the level of countries. So what I'm going to do for this session is use the next 20 or 25 minutes to provide an outline of my perspective on this topic as a way of then framing a discussion with a group of experts. First of all, from the panel, we have 4 Experts 2 focused on evaluation capacity development, working with international organisations, the Asia Development Bank and the UN Population Fund. And we have 2 experts from Mongolia and China, 2 countries in the region, who are both working in different ways to strengthen their systems from within. And finally, we'll, after a discussion with the panel, we'll close by engaging the audience in a Q&A. So I'll start this story in the mid-1970s in Australia. This was around the time of my birth. There were 2 pioneering evaluations which played a major role in reforming public management at the time. The very bureaucratically conservative covers of these reports are shown on this slide. The first was the Royal Commission, a wide-ranging public inquiry into the state of government administration in Australia, helmed by legendary former senior public servant. Another was conducted in parallel. It was a pioneering report on performance standards and evaluation in Australia's health and welfare system, conducted by a committee of the Australian Senate, so by politicians. Both had a major focus on the role played by evaluation in the Australian public service at the time. This is reflected in the title of the committee report, which you can see in blue in the centre of the screen, Through the Glass Darkly, which is the title of this presentation. Through the Glass Darkly. It alludes to the challenges that policymakers face in deciding what policies will be most effective in producing public value. That is, they're looking through a dark glass. These words come from a longer and famous biblical verse which goes, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know only in part, but then shall I know, even as I am also known." The verse clearly resonated with committee members as a metaphor for the role that evaluation can play in helping the Parliament and the public to understand the impact of government programs and to improve them, to see through the dark glass. Both reports were really concerned about the lack of use of evaluation and what could be done to address this. They described it as a tool to help us understand what is going on, but I quote, "one that is still far too little applied and seldom funded." The Parliamentary Committee was particularly scathing about the state of understanding at the time of the effectiveness of human services, describing the health and welfare system of Australia as out of control. The committee saw this as part of a larger crisis in public administration, not isolated to health and welfare. There were many broader and long-running implications from this work, but one of the more concrete outcomes was that the Australian Auditor General, who had from 1901, from the Federation of Australia, only focused on financial auditing, was asked to take on a new role. The new role was that he was asked to examine, it was a he at the time, to examine the efficiency of government programs. This then laid the foundation for the establishment of a new form of institutionalised evaluation called performance auditing. This was not an easy thing to achieve. When I worked with the Audit Office in the early 2000s, I worked with a colleague, an old hand in the office, who was a junior financial statement auditor at the time these efficiency audits were introduced. And he said it took many years for them to work out what they should be doing. Efficiency and value for money, we know, are really difficult to define, but even harder to assess. And the skill sets of financial auditors that were coming out of an accounting field with well-defined rules and standards for public accounting, they weren't well suited to the sort of broad conceptual data gathering challenges faced in assessing efficiency. And in some ways, the early mandate had been an impossible one to fill. The Auditor General was asked to focus on efficiency, but to steer away from the issue of effectiveness. Effectiveness was seen as the domain of politics at the time, not something the public service should be assessing. However, by the mid-1980s, a consensus had been reached about the nature of this new form of evaluation, performance audit, which has continued to this day. You can see it replicated by each of the states and territories of the Australian Commonwealth. These are independent governments with their own significant responsibilities. So I can almost hear the objections of some of you in the room. Why is he talking about audit? We're evaluators, we're not auditors. And I'm familiar with this, I know it's fun to poke fun at auditors. And I know there's reasons why professionally we might want to distinguish ourselves from them. And I've heard a lot on this, but my reasoning, and I know it's not universally agreed amongst evaluation practitioners, the performance audit is quite clearly a form of summative evaluation. This is the International Standards Organisation definition of performance auditing. If you look at it quite clearly, it stands as equally well as a definition for evaluation. It's an independent, objective, reliable examination of whether government undertaking systems, blah, 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 are efficient, effective, and whether there's room for improvement. It's about good governance, accountability and transparency and improvement of public administration. And these reports are influential. This is just a few headlines from different reports that have been produced in Australia. Also one on the right from Sri Lanka. It would not be hard to find thousands of these. So if you're looking for institutionalization of evaluation, actually this is not a bad place to start. But they're not the only place. We have, in the example I started this session with, two evaluations conducted within different institutional frameworks. We have a parliamentary committee producing a critical and influential evaluation, and a Royal Commission. Both had a very significant impact. But there are also a myriad of other public bodies that do evaluations that shape internal and external debate and decision making. Here we have an example of the regulatory organisation, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. This is the organisation that evaluates the safety and effectiveness of medicines and other therapeutic products in Australia. It's able to fine companies for making misleading claims about the efficacy of different medicines. So here there's the news reporting on them fining a public media personality for making misleading claims about a miracle cure for COVID-19. And then there are organisations like the Ombudsman's offices who evaluate decisions and services in response to complaints from members of the public about the treatment they've received from government bodies. So here you can see a report on the Ombudsman's evaluation of the Australian child support system, identifying systemic failings. Beyond these, and there are many, many of these institutions that do evaluation, there are also organisations like the Bureau of Statistics, which we all know are fundamental to producing information that's needed to conduct good evaluation. I'm not suggesting these bodies don't have problems or limitations, but there can be no doubt they're critical ones for the contested process of policy making and accountability, not only in Australia but everywhere. Just on the question of gaps, there's an interesting and ongoing question in Australia, also in Canada, I'm not sure whether there's other places, about whether there are grounds for a new public institution under the leadership of an evaluator general. So you can see here on the left-hand side some media commentary on the case that's being made for this. The case that's being made is made by a very powerful member of the current Australian government, the Assistant Treasurer, Andrew Leigh. And you can see the cover of one of Andrew Leigh's books on the right-hand side. He's produced many books on the theme of evidence and policy making, but he is a huge believer in the importance of evaluation and has been arguing hard within government that this new body should be established. Interestingly, so far he hasn't been successful. He's in cabinet, but he hasn't convinced his cabinet colleagues that his case is strong enough. And I think I'm not privy to those discussions, but in deciding not to establish a new office, I would imagine one of the concerns would be about potential duplication of other functions in government. So I'd like to broaden this discussion here beyond Australia. When I started my current role with UNDP, I was conscious that part of my mandate is to support UNDP to strengthen evaluation systems in the region. As I said, it's a very daunting task. I was very happy then to find that there'd been a recent academic review of the evaluation systems of 11 jurisdictions in the Asia Pacific. This is the third part of a series of studies that aims to take stock of evaluation systems globally and whether or not evaluation has been institutionalised. For those that are interested, there's a wealth of information in this review. It covers a range of different development contexts, from LDCs through to high-income countries. The countries it covers account for close to half of the world's population, includes India and China. Unfortunately, for many of us that believe that institutionalising evaluation is important, it makes for tough reading. Not the chapters themselves, but the overall conclusion reached by the review editors is very negative. While the countries covered by the study might be diverse, there's not much diversity in the quality of their evaluation systems, according to the review editors. From Australia, China, Bangladesh, Japan, Korea, the study concludes there's very weak institutionalisation of evaluation in all 11 countries. Drawing on information from country chapters about evaluation in the political and bureaucratic sphere, in the public sphere, and in the system of professions, the review editors conclude what exists are top-down systems focused on control and accountability. They conclude there's a low level of commitment to evaluation in national policies and key institutions. They conclude that there's a low level of understanding about what evaluation is amongst policymakers and the public. Now, I know we're a critical bunch, and I appreciate the world's far from perfect. There are challenges. In fact, the set of challenges we face now perhaps the most significant the world has faced since the end of the Second World War. However, I think there's something important that stands out to me as not quite right about this conclusion. That is, if evaluation actually is indispensable, how do countries like Australia, South Korea, Japan, many others achieve such a high level of standard of living for their citizens without achieving any significant success in institutionalising it? Without institutionalising evaluation to any significant degree, how did China achieve what the World Bank's described as the most sustained and remarkable transformation of any major country in history? Perhaps evaluation is not indispensable after all, or at the very least, perhaps there's no need to institutionalise it. Thankfully, I don't think this is what we can conclude from the interpretation of the evidence. This is because actually the review has taken a very narrow and, in my opinion, incorrect interpretation about what evaluation actually is. For Australia, the review doesn't recognise the importance or value of performance audit or any of the other bodies or institutions that I've mentioned earlier, royal commissions. It dismisses parliamentary inquiries or committee reports as a important form of evaluation. And it has similar negative conclusions about other jurisdictions where on the surface you'd expect to see a more favourable conclusion. So for example, on China, the review editors dismiss the value of China's target responsibility system, which the author of the China chapter identifies as central to any discussion of China's economic success. The review dismisses the relevance of China's system of economic responsibility audits, which the chapter author describes as an interesting combination of financial and performance audit and personnel evaluation. So a combination of three different forms of evaluation that have played a role in China's success. It also doesn't credit efforts in China outlined in the China chapter to counteract the risk of top-down approaches with methods that capture citizen, mass media, academic and non-profit organisation perspectives in evaluation systems. That is, there are clear signs that China's system has evolved and is still evolving. Despite these interesting innovations in evaluation, the study arrives at only negative conclusions about the institutionalization of evaluation in China on the basis that only a few evaluations in the definition of the study are carried out. So why does this matter and what does it mean for us as a community of experts? I want to talk a little bit about this. It matters because how we define evaluation and evaluation systems determines what we choose to focus on as a community that wants to strengthen those systems. If we focus too narrowly, we might miss the point. We might neglect the most important parts of the systems that we're working with. And when we start to see evaluation, I think as a broad church full of different types of actors and types of evaluation, I think it can help us better to understand where we fit in and how we can help. How can we help? You can see on this slide the Springer Review. This is the study arrives at two conclusions about the role of international organisations. The first is that they're a driving force in the evolution of evaluation. The second is that they're a role model and blueprint for other organisations. I think that the review is correct to highlight that international organisations are well placed in supporting institutionalisation of evaluation. I think we need to be careful in thinking through what it is out there, our strengths, in particular, whether we should be considered a blueprint for other organisations. On the surface, it has some merit. International development organisations place very prominent emphasis on evaluation. They've established well-resourced policies and systems for evaluating their work. They've established minor industries dedicated to expanding the use of experimental evaluation. We've seen that through bodies like 3IE, the Global Evaluation Initiative, the Centres for Learning on Evaluation and Results. They host large numbers of conferences, sponsor and run training programs like UNDP, and produce lots of publications on evaluation. There are those several reasons why the internal evaluation structures and practices of international organisations might not be the best template for domestic institutions. Firstly, evaluations arguably much more important to aid or development agencies than it is to domestic agencies. I say this for a few different reasons. Domestic organisations usually only focus on one sector and in one country, whereas development organisations work in many different countries at many different sectors, meaning they face a much greater risk that they will lack the evidence needed to develop effective programs. Domestic agencies have very direct feedback from their citizens. On the other hand, development programs, beneficiaries only have a kind of a relatively weak connection and weak political influence over aid agencies through their political masters. Secondly, the strong commitment to independent evaluation in international development is in part a function of the scepticism of political leaders about the justification for spending money overseas. The political leaders that argue against large aid budgets will often give the argument, well, charity should begin at home. It's not one that I believe with. In this context, evaluation is an important part of the political defence against the criticism that overseas aid is based on. That is, politicians tend to buttress political support by promoting strong evaluation systems. Reflecting this, the recent evaluation by the Centre for Global Development suggested that development spending in the UK had been subjected to 10 times more evaluative scrutiny than other UK government spending on a pound-for-pound basis. The implications for evaluators within international organisations is that we should be thinking broadly about how our organisations are or aren't engaged in supporting different parts of partners' evaluation systems. See the time's coming to close, but before I close, I did want to bring this home to how this discussion relates to the theme of the conference, navigating crises and building on successes. Drawing on my earlier points, our first message on this theme is that for us to be effective in strengthening systems, we need to be clear about what these are. We need to acknowledge and build on what is already working. In many jurisdictions, you can see, and this includes a set of institutions that have provided a reasonable basis for progress and development, especially in this part of the world. We've seen many examples of strong development progress, which has to reflect in some way the quality of the evaluation taking place in those countries. And we can see that at this moment in the world, many of those critical institutions are under assault. As these systems are eroded, we're going to see fertile conditions for cycles of distrust and volatility that we see in many countries, which will undermine our ability to make further progress. One of the key takeaways from critical reflections, for example, on recent events in Bangladesh, is about how undermining institutions like the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics and other key state institutions created the fertile conditions for unrest and the revolution that followed. My second message is that protecting and preserving our key institutions doesn't mean that it's safe for us to continue with the formulas that have worked for us in the past. Clearly, we're at a point in history characterised by danger and uncertainty, in part because of the failure of our systems to properly value the integrity of the ecosystems on which our future development and prosperity depends. Clearly, we need to update and reform the systems we've used to base our judgments of merit and worth and ensure that we're valuing the right things in our decision making. As a profession, I think there's an important role for us to play in leading thinking globally about how governments and societies should be reforming how they define public value. In doing so, we need to look beyond our own narrow frameworks and think about the strengths of existing systems based on a broad rather than a narrow understanding of evaluation. You can see here a summary of the questions I've been discussing. Given time, I won't go through them. I want to get to the panel because I know that we have a rich set of views there. One of the best parts of my job is actually working with people that are much smarter, more successful and better educated than I am. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they think. Here to introduce our panel, Dr. Asela Kalugampitiya is a Sri Lankan lawyer with both a Master's and PhD in evaluation from Germany. He's the immediate past president of the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and currently works for the UNFPA Independent Evaluation Office as a National Evaluation Capacity Development Specialist. He also happens to be the author of 3 of the chapters in the Asia Pacific volume of the Evaluation Globe study I've just been discussing, covering Sri Lanka, the Philippines and Nepal. We have with us Uuriintuya Dombon from the government of Mongolia. Uuriintuya currently leads the Evaluation and Monitoring Department for the Authority for Government Supervision in Mongolia, clearly a critical part of the evaluation architecture there. She comes from a career that's included roles as both advisor to the President of Mongolia and Director of the Mineral Resources Authority of Mongolia. We have Chuanhong Zhang, who's a professor at the China Agricultural University with a focus on China's domestic transformation and international development cooperation, specifically with an interest in China's poverty reduction, South-South cooperation, gender and development. Professor Zhang serves as a secretary of the China International Development Research Network, acts as the focal point for the China chapter of Network of Southern Think Tanks, and has published widely in the field of international development. Last but not least, we have Sonia Zhang, who leads evaluation capacity development with the Asian Development Bank in the Independent Evaluation Department. Sonia's perspective on this topic comes from over 30 years of international development experience in infrastructure operations at the ADB and World Bank across the world, actually, with a focus on urban resilience, climate adaptation, environment policy reform, amongst other things. She's held multiple roles from project leadership, environment safeguards, and evaluation. So welcome to the panel. So, I'm interested, you would have heard my presentation of the Evaluation Globe, which you were part of, Asela, very negative about the state of evaluation in the region. Basically, we all suck. Is this right? Or are we missing something? You did 3 chapters, so what can we say about the strengths or weaknesses? Can we compare countries and their systems? Are there some that are stronger than others?
Thank you, David. Thank you for the presentation and the question. And I welcome all of you after lunch and heavy morning sessions today. Now, regarding Evaluation Globe Asia Pacific, as David mentioned, this is the 3rd one. Before that, the first one was Evaluation Globe Europe, and Evaluation Globe Americas, both North America and Latin America. You can check these books online, but these are for sale actually. Asia Pacific one includes the countries David mentioned. Now, this Evaluation Globe uses framework to assess evaluation systems, whether the country institutionalized evaluation. There are 3 main areas: political system, social system, and system of professions. So political system includes whether there is evaluation law, policy in the country, whether there is institutional mechanism in the country, whether parliament or audit, they will mention about audit system. Audit system use evaluations or evidence. So those areas. And then social system is very interesting. And this is the first time social system was included to assess institutionalization of evaluation. You may have seen this kind of frameworks, even evaluation atlas, international atlas on evaluation 2001 and 2011. So there were 9 criteria, but only assess developed countries. But this one includes that international atlas also did not include social system. This one includes social system. Social system includes whether citizens and civil society are aware of evaluation, whether they demand evaluation, whether they use evaluation. So these are the aspects or criteria using the social system. And professional system about guidelines available, whether there is evaluation association and journal for evaluation, things like that. And evaluation education system, monitoring and evaluation courses available, those things. So the idea is that evaluation policy or law is available in the country, there is strong institution, evaluation is used by the parliament, and second aspect, citizens demand evaluations, they are aware of evaluation, they demand evaluation and they use evaluation. And then professional system, there are competent evaluators to produce good quality evaluation. So this is the theoretical framework for this, right? Whether this works in all countries and is a question. At the same time, now all regions already published, Asia Pacific, Americas and Europe, weakest criteria, weakest domain out of these three is social system. Whether people are aware of evaluation, whether they use evaluation, demand evaluation, this is the weakest. Maximum for any even developed countries is like 40%, and only few countries. And some countries, it's zero, unfortunately, including China, right? That is the weakest across all the countries, all the regions. So it seems that citizens are not aware of evaluation, they don't demand evaluation, they don't use evaluation, right? Now whether some of these aspects are available or exist, whether the countries have, that country has strong evaluation system is a question. Now Sri Lanka has evaluation policy, evaluation implementation framework, parliamentary institutionalization process went long way, and many education system, strong WOPE. Sri Lanka declared bankrupt country in 2022, right? So whether there is connection, whether you have these criteria exist, how does it translate to the development in the country? So I think main thing is that whether evaluative thinking is there. Right? Even if there is evaluation policy or law, if evaluations are not conducted, evidence is not generated, evidence is not used, whether that system works well. That's the question we have to ask. Now, Sri Lanka is the only country in South Asia having national evaluation policy, right? But only country declared bankrupt country in 2022 in South Asia, right? So, how does this translate? Having evaluation policy translate to this situation? Because there were no evaluations conducted, no evidence used for development in the country, or improvement of interventions in the country. So whether there is right formula, that is a question. Whether we can have universal template for all the countries, there is a question, because countries, it depends on the context, and it should be linked to the governance system as well. So whether this is integrated in the governance system. Now when it comes to Nepal, Nepal also has evaluation included in the national constitution, and the mandated organization, government public organization, public institution is National NPC, National Planning Commission, right? And they have evaluation guidelines. All the ministries and departments have evaluation units or at least focal points. So in that context, they have many criteria fulfilled according to the evaluation law framework. But at the same time, can we say that Nepal has strong evaluation system, right? At the same time, China, no evaluation law available. Many education programs are not available. At the same time, evaluations are conducted regularly, right? And there is continuous improvement in the country. So it's evaluative thinking as well as whether there is continuous improvement in the country using evidence. So system should include use of evidence and continuous improvement through evaluations. Otherwise, just having evaluation policy or law, or evaluation association, or just having different criteria is not enough for the country. That should be linked with the development of the country. So I stop here and then I can take questions.
Asela. So we've talked a little bit about China. I'm interested to hear from Professor Zhang around the role that evaluation has played in supporting China's development progress. It doesn't look like maybe what the Evaluation Globe study editors want it to look like, but I'm interested whether you have any insights into how it has actually worked.
Thank you, David, and thank you, UNDP, UNFPA, and Asia ADB for inviting me to join this panel. It's really a great opportunity for me to participate in this kind of open talk. You know, I didn't prepare very well, so I just speak on action, and my opinion does not really represent the official's opinion. And this is a very interesting and intriguing question. Of course, as mentioned earlier, you know, we don't have a large team of evaluation experts, and our policy is not quite in place as complicated and mature as other developed or even developing countries. But if you look at China's system, our definition of evaluation is very different from what most people think about it. And the evaluation system, I think, is much more complicated as the whole Chinese Chinese public administration system. I know the book, you know, I read the book, I did some homework as you assigned to me to read the chapter on China, the evaluation globe. The author indeed provides a very thorough overview of China's evaluation system. You know, in China, I think one very important definition of evaluation is supervision. That is missing from the author yet. So supervision is not just top-down approach, it is also a bottom-up approach. You know, evaluation is not within the government system. Actually, it's also a kind of whole society approach. I can give you an example of, because my working area is poverty reduction, rural revitalization, focusing on China's domestic transformation as well as China's international engagement. I just give you an example of targeted poverty strategy, how this strategy was implemented from the evaluation perspective. The first very important thing is, you know, how can we target the poor? Yeah, we need to target the most people who need help. Yeah, there are 6 very specific steps. Yeah, the first step is, of course, if you think you are poor, you need to apply to get subsidy from the government, right? That's the first step. The second, you know, your application will be reviewed by the villagers, group leaders. And the third step, we need to have cross-check of information at county level by public security, transport, and housing apartments or administration. If you say, I'm poor, I don't have a car, right? Yeah, we suppose that if you're poor, you don't have a car. So from the system, we need to check the transportation system under your household. Do you register a car? Okay, so we can do that. And the third one, you know, to identify your really poor household, we need to pass through the villagers' congress. Yeah, within each and every village, we have congress. And the fifth, then the information will be double-checked by the township resource elevation office, poverty resource allocation office, and then rechecked by the county level poverty elevation offices. So these 6 steps, you can say, to mobilize society's social participation is a very important part of this evaluation system. And of course, we also have this kind of multi-channel, all-around evaluation system that encompasses the inspection from the upper level government with the participation of other democratic parties, and also peer review system, inter-provincial, inter-municipal, inter-county level, and also third-party assessment. Of course, I know there are a lot of criticism on this as well. And the most important, I think, really effective one is media and unannounced visit to the poverty-stricken area, to the villages, to interview the people who are supposed to be the beneficiary of this poverty alleviation program. So from this, if you look at from the program level or strategic, how we implement the strategic level, we can see actually the evaluation system in China is much more complicated than it was described. It's not just a government approach, but more about whole society approach, and it is included, in the whole system. That's why we don't need much really big expert team, right? Because if you are expert, you need to be paid. And nowadays, use this kind of digitalization technologies, all the decisions are becoming very transparent. And if one misbehave of government leaders or officials, is on 热搜, we call it hot search. That is the very effective way for government to deal with it. So that's also the latest development of this kind of. So when we understand why Chinese policy implementation is so effective, we need to think about this kind of whole society approach for evaluation. I just stop here. Thank you.
It really adds actually to the paper, which I think already describes quite a complex system. It adds another layer, I think, to at least my understanding of what China is doing. I'm interested. One of the findings of the Globe review, which I think is absolutely true, is that there's not yet a common understanding of what evaluation is. Within our societies, but even potentially within the field. I'm interested to know from the panel whether they consider elements of systems that we've discussed, performance audits or committee reports or these village structures as parts of the evaluation system. So Dombon, Uri, as the evaluation policy lead in the Mongolian government, I wonder what you see as being the key parts of the Mongolian evaluation system, and what are the next steps? I think for development of that system in terms of what Mongolia is trying to grapple with.
Thank you, David. Please show me my slide paper. I have only 4 minutes because I will read my paper. Authority for Government Supervision Service as the key government body in charge of leading and coordinating the strengthening of the evaluation system by supervising the implementation of development policy documents and supporting public institutions with evaluation guidance and manuals. The Authority for Government Supervision consists of 7 main departments, and the evaluation and monitoring departments, which I lead, has 20 officers. The core values of our organization are results, impact, transparency, public trust, and quality of people's life. Based on my extensive experience in the formulation and implementation of public policies, I am committed to future advanced monitoring and evaluation practices in my country. The M&A system in Mongolia was first established in 1996, beginning with the regulation to assess the performance of public organizations. Over the years, through multiple reforms, it has expanded to include the evaluation of policy implementation as well. Since 1996, the M&A regulation has been revised 7 times, with the 8th revision adopted in 2025. The most notable feature of the latest reform is the separation of evaluation and from monitoring. This has created a legal environment for conducting evaluation in Mongolia and opened the door to adopting international methodologies. Within the strategic framework of the Evaluation and Monitoring Department, our vision is to elevate Mongolia's M&A system to an international level. To achieve this, we aim to ensure the integration of data and information, localized global best practices, and strengthening evidence-based decision-making. And please, next slide. This year, we had a great milestone in building a national evaluation system. In late 2024, we initiated communication with DEVAL, German Development Evaluation Institute, to conduct INSEE, National Evaluation Capacity Index. As a result, Mongolia became the first country in Asia to carry out INSEE. I would like to highlight the valuable contribution of the Mongolian Evaluation Association here, who led the initial foundation for collaboration between DEVAL and the Authority for Government Supervision, who also supported the implementation of INSEE by translating and localizing INSEE questionnaire and co-organizing the INSEE result dissemination conference at the Parliament House in May this year. The INSEE assessment results show that Mongolia scored an average of 4.4 out of 10 in its national evaluation capacity and system, indicating that while the foundation of the system has been established, future progress is needed in areas such as human resources, utilization, quality assurance, and inclusionary participation.
Thank you. Sonia, we haven't got to you yet. You've done a lot of work at the local government level, thinking about trying to help local governments to develop these systems, including in the context of local governments pointing at the driven of crises, right? Especially in the Philippines and India. So I'm interested to get your take on what this looks like from the work that you've done at a local level.
Thank you, David, and I also want to thank my co-panelists for setting the stage and the context so well. So you probably guessed from David's very kind introduction, I spent pretty much all my life getting evaluated, being on the other side, in operations, and my flair into evaluation, it was a new world when I joined IED. So that's just giving you a context of my own personal learnings. But yeah, I want to circle back, David, to the theme of this conference as well. So it's a really good segue, your question. And I tried to kind of link getting evaluated and being on the other side to one big learning that was never forget the for whom question. Like, for whom are we doing what we're doing, and how do we just stay relevant to the extent that we can. And I think our countries have made significant progress. I always like to see the glass half full, always. And I think I have a very optimistic view to development because it's a journey. You mentioned Philippines and India, and I think we've made significant progress. in that direction. There's targeted offices for monitoring and evaluation, and there's targeted training programs. So I think the very fact that the discourse has reached the national level and the subnational governments is significant progress, and it's a journey. So this very complex chart that I'm trying to unpack, and believe me, I'm not unpacking the whole thing. At the local government, I'm circling back to the theme, local government is the first responder. And if we never forget the for whom question, the second thing that has been a very important part of this learning aspect of bridging being evaluated and the evaluator or the assessor of effectiveness is the feedback loop. And I think that's a very crucial missing link. When we are evaluating projects, we should need to take those learnings back to conceptualizing, and I want to echo Asela's thought on having that evaluative mindset. So when I started as a very young environmental engineer, I didn't know what was on the other side of who's ever going to ask me. I was so focused on doing my thing, right? On impact assessment and all of that. But no, if we always keep the for whom question in mind, then we have that evaluative mindset. So that's one. And on the local government, it's a lot of burden. And having just worked in just across so many sectors, even in cities, it's the local government, it's watersheds, it's the local government, crisis hits, they are the first responders. So I tried to put together a kind of value proposition of co-learning. So it's a very abstract term. Did you learn your lesson? Did you do this? Did you do that? But when you start unpacking and bring the evaluative mindset, I try to develop a 3R principle. So what is the role of a public administrator at the local government level? The 3 R's, reliability, you want to build that accountability and trust in the institution. Response, because communities are waiting for that response and they are the first responders. And resilience, we're talking about resilience all the time. At the end of the day, the for whom question is, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's communities, they have to withstand shocks at all time. And it's a journey, so you see the yellow arrow, it's not ending. And eventually, if we want to reach that level of resilience, whether it's communities or infrastructure, we have to have a continuum of feedback loops. Whether we're looking at budget allocations, and we heard a lot of that in the morning sessions today, and whether we are looking at technical capacity, whether we are looking at anything, and lots of parameters were mentioned by all of you. It has to feed back into that evaluative mindset in the beginning. And the next stage of interventions of whether they're programs, technical assistance, projects, need to take that information back in those 3 R's, and we also as professionals, as development professionals, I feel, need to keep on having that lateral movement. And Asela mentioned the vertical and the lateral movement, and I completely echo the fact that the weak link is the social system, the communities, and as we all know as project managers, the results chain, we've heard of that before, the way we measure performance is the strongest as your weakest link. So again, it's the for whom question for me that has to be continuously answered. And the other aspect that I want to highlight in this context is what was echoed in the morning by VP Roberta when she talked about bridging evaluation and risk. And that's another weak link in our monitoring frameworks, is the risk assessment. I think we're not fair, or we don't be honest enough during our risk assessments, because you want the money on it, you want the project to the board, you want the money into the system. But what worked and why it may not work is an important aspect, and that's a lesson to be learned as well. Again, it affects the for whom question. So I feel at local governments, there's a lot of burden, but as development professionals, we really need to create those platforms, and facilitate that engagement at the local government and create the platform for co-learning, create the platform for value propositions, create that platform. I think that would really be our value addition. I can just stop there.
Thank you, Sonia. Look, I'm conscious that there's more I'd like to hear from the panel, but I'd also like to get to the audience for questions. So if just very quickly, Asela, just building on what Sonia's just said, how is it that UNFPA is thinking about supporting your evaluation capacity development specialist? What are the best levers for UNFPA in engaging with governments in the region to support system development?
Thank you, David. Now, UNFPA has strong component national evaluation capacity development, which is coming from the UNFPA evaluation policy. And I know that many UN agencies, including UNDP, have this mandate for national evaluation capacity development. Now, as I mentioned, evaluation globe, there are three main domains. The last one is evaluation professions. Now, many countries face challenges in finding good quality, competent evaluators who can produce good quality evaluations. So, UNFPA Evaluation Office mainly support young and emerging evaluators, their capacity building, opportunities for them, networking for them, because now we know that evaluation is not a recognized profession. And evaluation associations are there to take this forward and make it a professional aspect, but at the same time it is not happening in many countries. Because of this, so many organizations, countries face this challenge to find competent evaluators. So looking at this, we support young and emerging evaluators at the regional level, country level, and we mainly work with Evaluate Network. At the same time, working with parliamentarians. Now, first domain is about a political system, right? So, working with the governments, at the same time, use of evaluation is the main thing. So, parliamentarians are main users. Parliamentarians face many difficulties. They really want to use evidence, but at the same time, where do they find evidence? And how can evaluation community support use of evidence by parliamentarians? It's not easy because evaluation reports are this thick. You expect parliamentarians to read this. They have many other responsibilities. At the same time, read 200 pages report and use evidence. That doesn't happen. So how do we strengthen the parliament system, where the parliament research unit provide brief evaluation findings and recommendations to the parliamentarians. So those are some examples. We work with governments as well as work-based evaluation associations as well. But because of time, I won't go into details. Thank you.
Thanks. It's interesting what you say. When I was with the Australian Auditor General, one of the things that was often said in the office was that it wasn't our reports that were read, it was the introductory chapters to our reports that were read the most in Parliament, because parliamentarians have no time looking for very plain descriptions of policies and programs, and they were the best place where you could find the introductory chapters, not the rest.
I just want to, in 30 seconds, add something. Ruben is here from South Africa. South Africa has this system that evaluation report, full report is 25 pages, executive summary is 5 pages, for policy papers 1 page. They have strong evaluation system. Ruben raised the hand at the beginning. So that's a good example.
Uri, you're looking at working with DIVA, and I'm wondering what you're interested in working with the international organisations and how you think that Mongolia can best learn from us.
Thank you, David. Past 30 years of my professional journey has been very rich, starting from being a civil servant to being promoted to different levels of government and parliament positions, leading to becoming an advisor to the president of Mongolia. After all this, now leading Mongolia's key evaluation function in the government, finally I feel like evaluation has a power to have a positive impact on people's lives, I think. So, in Mongolia, monitoring and evaluation have long been regarded as a similar concept and implemented using the same methodology at the level of government institutions, especially both monitoring and the implementation of government activities and conducting evaluations were perceived as having the same purpose, focusing mainly on tracking the implementation of policies, programs, and plans. In reality, however, monitoring and evaluation are two distinct functions with similar objectives but different methodology, application, and timing. For this reason, with the aim of developing an evaluation system and localizing international methodologies and new regulation approved in 2025, stipulated this that monitoring and evaluation should be regulated separately. Under this regulation, evaluations may be conducted at different stages of policy implementation, ex ante, mid-term, and ex post end. Depending on their purpose, different other approaches could be implemented. Unfortunately, the new regulation requires that the evaluation is carried out in accordance with the 6 OECD DAC evaluation criteria. This is intended to train Mongolian civil servants to work with internationally recognized methodologies and enable more objective assessment of policy implementation. Until now, Mongolian civil servants have had almost no experience in independently conducting policy evaluations using those 6 OECD criteria. Therefore, I would say that the international organizations play an essential role in strengthening Mongolia's evaluation system, particularly in providing methodological support, training, ensuring independence, and helping to localize international standards. Thanks.
Thank you. Diane, I did just want to just quickly get to you because I know I'm not sure now what China has to learn from the world. I'm sure it still does, but also what it has to share with the world. But you've been doing some work with the EU around thinking about China's international development monitoring evaluation system. So I'm wondering what you've sort of learned or taken away from that experience.
Yes.
2 minutes.
Okay. China has been a recipient, right, for a long time. For our team, actually, at China Agricultural University has been a recipient for a long time. We have received some funding from many international organizations. I myself personally actually had worked with DFID from the UK. From my personal experiences, we can see the Western development project focused on the documentation of every step of project implementation. And the first step actually is log frame. It took about half a year to co-design the log frame, right, with the recipient, the partners. And then later, each quarter, they ask us to write reports to record what we have been done. And then in the middle term, they will hire some external evaluators to evaluate our program. And of course, it costs a huge amount of money But if you follow those procedures, you will provide evidence-based the knowledge, right? So the EU Western countries are really good at knowledge production and knowledge dissemination as well. And of course, this kind of knowledge production process is very time-consuming and cost is also very high. And we Chinese sometimes think, okay, we only focus on visible things. If you say Chinese aid, you say the stadium, right? Sports stadium, infrastructure projects. We would rather to use our money on those visible projects. We can see how much for agricultural projects. We also doing maize technology transfer project in Tanzania, my team at China Agriculture, and we only care about how much yield has been increased and how many farmers were trained and all those kind of things. We don't care too much about this documentation things when they ask us to provide. Okay, did you do baseline? Did you record the process and how many farmers were covered? It's very hard for us to get those kind of data, and it's also very hard for us to generate the best examples, the best practices, right? Although the projects themselves are really good, very effective. So I think that's what we need to learn from our Western partners. And of course, I also suggest our Western partners don't focus too much on those formalities and procedures and invest more on real things. So that's my suggestion. Okay.
Thank you. That's a really fascinating observation. It's a good segue to just maybe asking you, Sonia. I mean, do we overcomplicate things? Sometimes, like how much of what we're doing is strictly necessary towards the outcome, and are there things that we can learn from a more practical, maybe concrete kind of focus that Diana's talking about?
Complicate things more than they already are. And as you saw, the idea of that one slide, it is already complex, right? So I think the international development community has a lot to offer, and but countries shouldn't be adopting; they should be adapting. And I think that's really important because the context of the geographical situation, the economic situation, and the people situation is very different. So global good practices can be tapped, but I think countries now are very smart, and they should be using the donor community smartly to adapt them and not templatize things.
Because we love a good template. I'm keen to hear from our audience questions or comments or experiences that I'd like to share on any of this topic, please. If you could, I'm not sure what, do we have the mics in the centre of the room? If you could just make your way to the mics. And we have, I think, another 7 minutes, so time for 2 very short questions, I think.
Do I have to identify myself better, right? I'm Ibrahim from the Auditor General's Office of Maldives. David was talking about a very important question when it comes to these things. Yeah? Strong evaluation systems an essential condition for making progress towards SDGs. As we all know that it's coming to a close, is a time horizon for implementation of these SDGs. In 2030, that particular time horizon will be over. I'm just wondering if UN is going to develop another framework and how these SDGs will be transferred or translated into the new framework, if any. And much more importantly, as David has asked, as independent evaluators, any of you from the panel has done any evaluation of implementation of SDGs in any jurisdiction?
Thank you. Should we get one more? I think we had a few more questions, so let's line them up and then we'll try and respond quickly.
From the Cook Islands in the South Pacific, thank you for the presentation. The Cook Islands, like many countries in the Pacific, we're sort of starting our journey with formalizing MNE. I think for most of us, our interaction with MNE is driven primarily by development partners who come in and implement various development projects in our countries, and they are the ones who are generally responsible for doing the MNE. But now we're starting our journey, we're trying to figure out, I suppose, what is the best system for us to put in place. So this presentation has been very useful. I liked David's comments about the possibility of using existing institutions. A lot of our countries, especially mine, we have very, very small populations, we have limited capacity, and therefore we have limited capability. We have an audit office, for example. We do use parliamentary committees, and I think we've been looking at the possibility of using those existing institutions rather than developing a new institution because we just don't have the capacity to do that. So I'm really pleased to hear that, building a new system or building a new agency may not necessarily be the best way to help us start our journey. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and the discussion. My name is Yanje Kim, and I am from the Green Climate Fund Independent Evaluation Unit. So I found the topic of the paper very interesting, right on. I could relate to some of the findings based on my observations and experiences working for GCF, but also I'm a Korean national, and I know certain things about the government and the way it works. And so I'm wondering, in your paper, whether you also considered some cultural aspects of a lot of Asian countries and the development model that a lot of the countries have taken, whereby, one very decisive leader makes decisions about the way the countries would develop, and then we are to kind of, follow and really don't question about the development model that the leader must have adopted. Those cultural aspects, I do think they come in very heavily, even when it comes to developing evaluation systems and a culture of evaluation and learning. Also, I found the discussion about social systems quite interesting. So when the general public is not used to this kind of evaluative thinking, there is no awareness really about evaluations and learning loops and feedback, what can be done to strengthen or foster a culture of evaluation and learning at the national level? I can tell you that even for the Great Climate Fund, we are an independent evaluation office, and to really foster a culture of evaluation learning, it has taken a long time, and we've had some wins. But to do that at the national level, I think it's a very lofty goal and objective that we need to get to. So any forward-looking tips and recommendations will be really useful. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, given the time, I'll maybe just try and quickly address those together. I think just on the last question, swinging back to the title of the presentation, Through the Glass Darkly, I think there's something quite mysterious about these processes. I'm a fan of Stefan Durkheim, if anyone's read his work, but he's got this thing on development bargains. The problem is that if you don't have a development bargain, how do you get one? He's big on institutions. If you don't have good institutions, how do you get them? There is a tradition of authoritarian or strong leadership in Asia. Lee Kuan Yew's a good example that's produced significant progress for citizens that have then democratized, whereas there are other examples in the region where that path was not followed. So I don't think there's any universal template or set of magical ingredients in this. I guess my idea is can we get closer to discussing what we think are the kind of key ingredients for what will work, at least bureaucratically. I think it's obviously I'm steeped in my own cultural norms and systems, and I find them fascinating and difficult and not always right. Cook Islands, I think, on the question, I think it's wonderful that the discussion has resonated. I do encourage to think about, especially in small contexts, to think about mechanisms that you can already use. I think that's one of the major concerns in a lot of contexts is about proliferating institutions and creating chaos. I do think that the performance audit is a natural next step for a lot of countries, and I know that from working in the Australian context, where there are actually a lot of countries that have found that difficult to implement. I don't know, I don't have a line to the Secretary General on what's next on the SDGs. I'm sorry, I would presume that there's going to be significant unfinished business come 2030. I think the idea of the SDGs as a framework for thinking about how we're going as a globe in addressing some kind of minimum standards is, I think, still going to have a lot of relevance and salience beyond 2030. I don't personally think that it's possible to evaluate, to do one evaluation of the country's progress against the SDGs in a way that's particularly meaningful. I think we're evaluating SDGs all the time, but I would like to see us get beyond this kind of headline statistical traffic light summaries into things that are more granular, even if I recognise that the traffic lights are important. That's all. I think maybe just quickly.
I can very quickly add to that point on fostering a learning culture. And something that can be adapted again is what we do at MDB, at ADB, and I think the World Bank follows the same, is also looking at the learning from a self-evaluation mechanism that the operations teams who are designing projects and implementing them go through a self-evaluation of their own projects. And then it's the independent evaluation's role. So in a way, you're actually fostering a learning culture because the same evaluation criteria is being applied by project teams as well as then a triangulation through a validation exercise by the IED. So it's a cyclical process of learning, and slowly we're dealing with human behavior, so learning takes a while, but it fosters that culture definitely.
One minute from Diana and then Asela to close things.
Okay, I just want to respond very briefly about this independent evaluation agency idea. Personally, I think, if we think about China's context, I don't think independent evaluation agency will be more effective than our current performance management system. This system so far, I think, as mentioned by our keynote speech this morning, it functions very well to accumulate concerted efforts. That means, to make each and individual ministries, government agencies, and even local governments' efforts to in our national grant strategies. So that is very effective. That the central government decomposes key evaluation indicators to lower level government, and then the central government evaluate the local government performance based on using these indicators, and the results can be effectively applied to, use these results as important reference for rewards, punishment, promotion, and performance bonus. So far, it's very effective. Of course, there are many people say there are a lot of internal correlations, but with the digitalization, the transparency, it's very difficult for them. If we can combine peer review process, like, different provinces, they have internal computation, right? This kind of computation actually provides very effective mechanism to keep this system in function. So I can give you a lot of examples based on my observation. We deal with a lot of government officials for our domestic projects. And if we know we are good friends, I'm from the upper level government, you're from local level government, if I go there, noticed actually in your area, there's a shelter house. That means the house that didn't meet the requirement of poverty alleviation targets. I can go to you and tell you, okay, you need to revise this action. You need to help these people immediately, or else you will be punished. So this kind of internal negotiation or kind of collation is really suitable to Chinese culture and context. So that's why I don't advocate for each and every country to have independent evaluation agencies. You need to think about your local context. That is very important. Okay.
Yeah, very quickly regarding SDGs. We all know that MDGs didn't have many components, right? SDGs have the UN resolution on Agenda 2030 has strong component on follow-up and review. So countries are, they can submit voluntary national reviews, VNRs, every year. Usually countries, submit this, 2-3 years gap. And first VNR was in 2016, and the mentioning about the word evaluation was nil in all the VNRs. 2017, almost nil. And then mentioning about the word, not about evidence, using evidence for VNR. This is self-reporting, right, by countries. And then 2018, there was some mentioning about monitoring and evaluation. Just mentioning, right, not using evidence. 2018, Finland conducted their first evaluation of the sustainable development strategy of the country. They have their own strategy, sustainable development strategy. Because 2019 was their election, they wanted to inform the citizens that how to vote based on the progress, sustainable development progress of the country, right? That's why they conducted it. And they used this evaluation with the evidence for the 2020 VNR. And then Nigeria conducted, and then Costa Rica, but only few countries, right? So as David mentioned, so it's evaluating SDGs is not easy, but at the same time there are a few examples. My question about other development strategy from UN is why we wait for UN to give us a strategy, right? Why not country-led evaluation systems, country-led development strategy? Because UN already introduced MDGs, SDGs. Now countries can have own strategies. Because the issue is sometimes, okay, now this is coming from outside, so it's not our own strategy. So countries do not own the strategy. M&E systems also the same issue. Okay, this is from donors, it's not our system. So that's why country-led M&E systems are promoted. Thank you.
I'd like to just finish by thanking the audience. I apologise for running over time slightly, and thanking also our panel, Asela, Uri, Chuanhong and Sonia for your words of wisdom today. Thank you all.